And we're working to provide that.
Michelle Kellerman, all the way in the back.
Hey, Michelle.
Just real quickly on the Gaza, how would you characterize the talks on a new hostage deal for a pause? Is that imminent? Are you making progress on that? And then more broadly, you know, we end this year with much of the world blaming the U.S. and Israel for, or seeing it as America's war also. It's hurting America's image in the world. There's a stalemate in Ukraine and no new aid package. The fighting goes on in Sudan. I wonder if there's anywhere that you're rethinking strategy or have some ideas on how to change the dynamics on any of those conflicts. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. On the question of hostages and a pause, this is something we'd very much like to see happen. As you know, we were instrumental in getting the first humanitarian pause that facilitated the release of 110 hostages. Israel has been very clear, including as recently as today, that it would welcome returning to a pause in the further release of hostages. The problem was and has been and remains Hamas. They reneged on commitments that they made during the first pause for hostage releases. And the question is whether they are in fact willing to resume this effort. But certainly it's something that we would welcome. I know that Israel would welcome, and I think the world would welcome. So we'll see what they choose to do. We remain very actively engaged in seeing if we can get a pause back on and hostages moving out again of Gaza. That's something we're on every single day. More broadly, I think what's important to always remember is that virtually none of the challenges we're dealing with are like flipping a light switch and you suddenly get total success in the course of a day, a week, a month, even a year. It's almost always a process and a constant effort to get to a better place. We were talking about Ukraine a short while ago. Very important to put this in context. As I said at the outset, if you look at where we were in February of 2022 and where we are now, well, February 2022, when the Russians went in, most people were predicting that they'd make very quick work of Ukraine and Putin would succeed in his goal of erasing it from the map and subsuming it into Russia. That has failed. And it's failed first and foremost because of the courage of the Ukrainian people, but also because of the leadership we provided in making sure with dozens of countries around the world that Ukraine had what it needed to succeed in repelling the Russian aggression. And now we're engaged in an effort to help Ukraine stand on its own 2 feet, democratically, militarily, economically, not only dealing with the current challenge that Russia continues to pose, but setting it up for the long term. And a lot of very important and good work has been done and continues to be done on that. Militarily, we have 30 countries around the world now that are helping, including the United States, that are helping Ukraine build a future force, one that can deter aggression and defend against it if it comes in the future. We're extensively engaged on trying to bring much more private sector investment and activity into Ukraine so that it can thrive economically. And we're having some real success there. And that creates a virtuous cycle where investment comes in, the tax base goes up, and increasingly, Ukraine can pay for itself. And of course, we're working to deepen democratic reforms and help Ukraine combat corruption, which is necessary for getting that investment to flow, and also for Ukraine to be a strong democratic state going forward. And as I mentioned, we just had the EU open accession talks. Now, all of that takes time. All of that takes effort, but we're in a place where not only have we helped Ukraine repel this Russian aggression, but as I said, we're putting it in a place where it can stand on its own, stand strongly on its own, and succeed and thrive in the future. When it comes to, you mentioned Sudan, we've been actively engaged there as well in trying to end the horror of the, in effect, civil war between 2 military groups, the SAF and the RSF, And as recently as about a week ago, we helped get an agreement that the two leaders, Burhan and Hamedi, generals, would meet and commit to a ceasefire. Now, that still has to happen, and we're pressing to make sure that it does. But this is the product of day in, day out work by our diplomats, as well as many others around the world, including the African Union, IGAD, and other partners. We've talked about Israel and Gaza. Let me just say this. We believe that, as we said from the outset, Israel has not only a right but an obligation to defend itself and to try to make sure that October 7th never happens again. Any other country in the world faced with what Israel suffered on October 7th would do the same thing. We've also said, and we've been very clear, that how Israel does it matters, and matters tremendously. And there, too, we've been very deeply engaged with them to maximize protections for civilians, to maximize humanitarian assistance, to minimize harm to people in Gaza. One of the things that's striking to me is that, understandably, everyone would like to see this conflict end as quickly as possible. But if it ends with Hamas remaining in place and having the capacity and the stated intent to repeat October 7th again and again and again, that's not in the interests of Israel. It's not in the interests of the region. It's not in the interests of the world. And what is striking to me is that even as, again, we hear many countries urging the end to this conflict, which we would all like to see, I hear virtually no one saying, demanding of Hamas that it stop hiding behind civilians, that it lay down its arms, that it surrender. This is over tomorrow if Hamas does that. This would have been over a month ago, 6 weeks ago, if Hamas had done that. And how could it be? How can it be that there are no demands made of the aggressor and only demands made of the victim? So it would be good if there was a strong international voice pressing Hamas to do what's necessary to end this. And again, that could be tomorrow.
Leon.
I have a follow-up.
Sir?
Oh, there you are, Leon. I was looking for you. Right there.
Sort of.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to insist on this a little bit. I mean, I know you've just given answers, but I mean, you're very careful, obviously, publicly, as to what you say on the Israel-Gaza conflict, Hamas conflict. You mentioned, far too many Palestinians have been killed. You've mentioned a gap between the intent and the result. So I'm wondering, at this point in stage, that gap appears, to me at least, or to observers, to be widening. And as to what extent are you going to allow that to widen even more? In other words, is there a red line for you, in a sense, regarding Israel's response to Hamas?
Leon, what I'd say is this. It's clear that the conflict will move and needs to move to a lower intensity phase. And we expect to see and want to see a shift to more targeted operations with a smaller number of forces that's really focused in on dealing with the leadership of Hamas, the tunnel network, and a few other critical things. And as that happens, I think you'll see as well the harm done to civilians also decrease significantly. We've said all along, and we have these conversations almost every day, that it is vitally important how Israel conducts its operations. Again, with a focus on protecting civilians, minimizing harm to them, maximizing assistance getting to them. And the last couple of months have been gut-wrenching when you see the suffering of men, women, and especially children in Gaza. That affects each of us. Well, let me speak for myself. It affects me very, very deeply, which is why we're so intent on seeing this through to completion quickly, effectively, and doing everything possible to minimize the harm to those who are caught in a crossfire of Hamas's making. And again, I come back to this basic proposition. There seems to be silence on what Hamas could do, should do, must do, if we want to end the suffering of innocent men, women, and children. It would be, I think, good if the world could unite around that proposition as well.
Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Right, Courtney.
You touched on this with respect to Ukraine, but there's growing concern internationally that further delays or outright denial of U.S. and EU assistance to Ukraine could lead to a Russian victory, perhaps in 2024. The administration has said that there are no additional funds to draw upon absent congressional passage of the supplemental funding request. So realistically, I mean, how long can Ukraine hold out without additional Western support? Is it weeks? Is it months? And what is the long-term strategy? I know you talked about it being a difficult year, given the struggle to regain much of the territory that Russia has seized. Thanks.
So, Courtney, thanks. First, to emphasize something that you said. Other than the supplemental request that the President has made of Congress, there is no magic pot of money that we can draw from. The assistance, the support that we have designated for Ukraine, that is running out. It's running down. We are nearly out of money that we need, and we're nearly out of time. I can't put a precise date on it, but that's the direction that this is moving in, which underscores the urgency of getting this supplemental budget request through. We have made a real investment in Ukraine's future, in its freedom, and it makes no sense to me that we would now renege on that investment, having already done so much, and having already put Ukraine in a position where it can not only survive, but actually thrive going forward. And we have a very clear plan, as I said, to make sure that Ukraine can stand on its own 2 feet, militarily, economically, democratically, so that these levels of support and assistance will no longer be necessary. But we have to help Ukraine get through the next period of time, get through this winter, get through the spring and summer. I'm also focused on the fact that they have their own plans to continue, not only to deter the Russian aggression, but to continue to take back territory that was seized from them by Russia. As you know, they've taken back more than 50% of the territory that Russia took in February of 2022, and that's going to be an ongoing effort. But the most important thing is, as I said, making sure that we get Ukraine to a place where it can stand on its own feet. And we see that. It is there before us, but we have to continue to provide the support to get them to that place. And I want to emphasize 2 things again, because it bears repeating every single time. One, this is not just the United States alone doing it. It's the United States and dozens of other countries with better burden sharing than I've seen in any other crisis that I've been involved in over 30 years. I mentioned this before. We provided about $70 billion to Ukraine over the last couple of years. Our allies and partners, more than $110 billion. So they are more than picking up their share of the burden. Second, as I mentioned before, virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine and the security assistance that would be that's in this supplemental budget request, that gets invested right here in the United States. That's where it's spent. And that not only helps procure the weapons that Ukraine needs, it provides good jobs here in the United States. It builds our own defense industrial base. So in many ways, this is a win-win for us. And it's why I would hope Congress acts and acts quickly. And again, as I said before, we know who will be happy if, for whatever reason, this budget request does not go through. And they're sitting in Moscow, they're sitting in Beijing, they're sitting in Tehran.
The last question, Olivia.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You just told us here, and you've
Often said before, that there's no higher priority for the United States than bringing home Americans who are wrongfully or arbitrarily detained overseas or being held hostage. Dozens of American families right now are living through another holiday season, entering another new year without their loved ones by their side. Cases are lingering in Russia, China, Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Saudi Arabia, many other countries that I know you know well. So what is your message to those families right now struggling to share in the joy of news of some Americans being freed and some feeling increasingly hopeless, increasingly left behind by their own country? And if I may specifically ask you on known cases in Russia, where Vladimir Putin appeared last week to be holding the door open to some kind of deal, saying the American side must hear us and make a decision that will satisfy the Russian side as well. Have the Russians made a counter-offer for the release of Paul Whelan and Evan Gershkovich? Thank you very much.
Thank you. My message to Americans who have their loved ones being arbitrarily detained someplace around the world is twofold. One, we're with you. The president is with you, and he's working for you every single day to bring your loved ones home. And second, do not give up hope, because we have demonstrated time and again that even when something seemed hopeless, it wasn't. We brought more than 36 Americans who were being arbitrarily detained back home to their families over the last 3 years. And each and every one who comes home should be a message of hope to those who remain detained and to their families and loved ones. That not only is it possible, it's happening. It happens. So it's, of course, one thing for me to say that. It's another thing if you're a member of one of these families that has a loved one being detained, who have to live through that every hour of every day. The uncertainty, the not knowing. None of us can fully put ourselves in their shoes. But I've spent a lot of time meeting with the families of those who are arbitrarily detained, held hostage. And for me, and for the president, this is not, these are not names on a piece of paper. These are not numbers. They're real people, real families, whose lives have been torn apart by the arbitrary actions of other governments or groups. And remembering, as I do every day, that we're talking about real people, real lives, real families. That's what motivates us to do everything possible to bring them back. With regard to Russia, Evan, Paul Whelan, all I can say is this: we're very actively working on it. And we will leave no stone unturned to see if we can't find the right way to get them home and to get them home as soon as possible. I can't get into any more details than that. You'll understand why, but it's very much a focus of our actions and activities. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. May I wish you a very happy New Year, holiday season. I hope we won't have occasion to see each other during this period, but you never know. And for those who are joining our next Middle East trip, which leaves in a few hours, we'll see you then. Thanks.
Happy holidays.